It's real.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Nostalgia Crackdown here on Let's Get Ready Network. I'm Adelia. That's my buddy Josh. We reminisce about the Schmoedown on this show, and today we're going to reminisce about the Schmoedown in a different way than we ever have before, because today is our Schmoedown What Ifs episode. Josh, this was your idea, so why don't you explain to everyone what it's going to be?
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about our top 5 what ifs, basically. If maybe the most interesting or something. I left what our top 5 is very vague, just because the top 5 is different for each person. Maybe something you're looking forward to or you're just interested in. After all, right now it's October. It's the season of spooks, and so let us go down memory lane and see what would at least wonder what Schmoedown history would be like if one event went a different way than it did previously, or some sort of turning point of the Schmoedown where it could have gone two ways, and we saw path number 1, but what does path number 2 look like? I think what ifs are fascinating, especially in sports and entertainment, especially in the Schmoedown that combines those two. I'm excited to talk about it.
Me too. So we each have our top 5 lists, and let's start with my number 5. And my number 5 is, what if Andrew DiMolanta had won the 2020 Star Wars Twitch tournament? He came so close. We all remember the heartbreaking loss he had to Andres Cabrera in that final. Would he have been able to beat Alex Damon at that spectacular, unlike Andres, who did not? Would Alex have just beaten him and gone on a dominant run, and we never end up with a different Star Wars champion until, say, a Thomas Harper comes along? Would it have kicked off a dominant run for Andrew even quicker than he had his run as champion? So it's a fascinating question to me.
Absolutely. I think I didn't have a Star Wars one, so I'm really glad you came up with this one and we're talking about it, because that Star Wars tournament was such an important part of the Schmoedown history, especially for Star Wars. And I think like Ace being able to win that tournament is such an interesting path A. But DiMolanta versus Damon, we saw that match later on, and that was arguably one of the greatest matches of all time. I wonder if we get that match, if it's as spectacular of 2020. Do they both go perfect in that match? Or is it a bit different? Like the butterfly effect, when you move one thing, all these other things start to move. So now that perfect match is considered maybe the greatest match of all time. Maybe that doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen the same way. Maybe Damon defends, maybe he doesn't. But either way, then you would think no matter if DiMolanta or Damon, whoever wins, Andres would probably be the next person to get the title shot, given the path that DiMolanta got, if I remember correctly. So
I think so, yeah.
So then you get Andres either versus Damon, which is like, oh, maybe if Andres had more time to prepare or was hungrier from a loss or something like that, does he have a better shot against Damon? Or if he's against DiMolanta, it would be interesting to see those matches of that, seeing DiMolanta's first defense against Andres Cabrera, the person who he beat in the Star Wars tournament. I think it's fascinating, and there's a lot to think about. I also, if I'm trying to remember the faction situation off the top of my head, like how would that affect the faction race? I don't think it would, because I think it was.
Don't remember.
I think that was Mercs versus Rockstars, if I remember correctly.
Or no, DiMolanta was on Finstock Exchange. Damon was on the Rockstars. Where was Ace? Ace was on.
I think Swag, right?
Swag, I think, yeah.
So that might even affect the race for the Finstock Exchange, because if DiMolanta makes it to the championship, that could be 5 whole points. That if he beats Damon, I'm trying to remember how close that race was off the top of my head. Just full disclosure, I don't know Adelia's 5. I told Adelia my 5, so she can make banners and the show looks better. So this is me reacting live to it. I think there's I love thinking about this type of stuff because there's so much that you don't even think about that affects it. And you could definitely see that Star Wars tournament match, that final question, Ace winning it, is one of those turning points of the Schmoedown for sure.
I completely agree. So let's go to your number 5 now, Josh. And Josh's number 5 is, what if Team Action beats the Shire Wolves?
So that was a live match, and it wasn't a number one contender match or a championship match, if I remember correctly. But I think given the next two opponents within the path, which was World's Finest with Eric Zipper and Winston Marshall, and then the Brienne Chandler team, assuming that holds true, I think there's a very good chance we have a Team Action championship if they beat the Shire Wolves. I think you could even reword this question as if what if Ben Bateman doesn't mess up the word when he's answering that important final round question, if I remember correctly.
Oh, yeah, when he says Giancarlo Stanton instead of, I think it was Giancarlo Esposito.
Yes, that is correct. So it's interesting because if you remember, not only does this affect Team Action's legacy, because I think it would be not amazing, but like so interesting, and I'd be really excited to ever see how the storyline would be affected by a Team Action championship team. Like how the rest
Yeah.
of the league would react to Team Action's winning the belt, especially so early on in their careers. Not early on in their careers, but like they were still young and up and comers, I think, at that point. Although that was, I think their last match actually, so maybe not. But not
Yeah,
only
because this was right before Anarchy.
yes, but not only does it affect the whole league if Team Action wins the championship and they beat the Shire Wolves. If the Shire Wolves lose this, they might be immediately broken up because then the Anarchy tournament comes in and they get breaking up within the process because every team was getting breaking up within the process. Unless there's some storyline that Emma Fyfe has something over Kalinowski to have him rig the draw for the Shire Wolves, which you could always do. But either way, you either have a possible future without the Shire Wolves, or you have a hungry Shire Wolves looking to take the belts off Team Action within that Anarchy tournament. Maybe the tournament final. Oh, and by the way, the team that won the tournament was Who's the Boss in Anarchy. And Who's the Boss comprised of Ben Bateman. That team never exists if Team Action beats the Shire Wolves and goes on to win the belts. But maybe, let's say that Brienne doesn't use her free for all shot because remember she used it because she wanted to guarantee a woman getting a belt. There would be no guarantee there, or would she still use it and maybe have a different partner with more motivation and more like, hey, we can't let Team Action win the belts, so I've got to use this free for all shot. I have to make sure I use all I can. Who knows the difference and how that works? And it would be fascinating. I think there's just so many like dominoes that kind of fall into place where it's like, oh wait, this is a bit different. Oh wait, this is a bit different as well. And I think it changes the whole outcome of like almost every match of the after this season if this match goes differently.
Totally agree. There's so many things that could have gone differently if Team Action had beaten the Shire Wolves. Would we have ever gotten the Bateman versus Guy singles matches that were they're pretty iconic, even if they weren't the best matches ever. I will never get the visual of the first Bateman versus Guy match in the wrestling ring in Houston out of my mind. This is a really good one, Josh, and it kind of plays into my number 4, which is, what if Sick in the Head had beaten the Shire Wolves?
Oh, this is an interesting one.
Yeah. So Brienne Chandler and Brian Bishop would have been teams champions. Would Clark and Rachel ever have gone on their run with the Five Club and everything else that them winning the championship like kicked off as far as their confidence went? And would this have been the end of the Shire Wolves? Because when they did the draw for Anarchy, both Rachel and Clark had different partners for Anarchy in that tournament. One of them was supposed to team with Andrew Guy. I don't remember who the other
Rachel
was supposed to team with.
It was supposed to be Rachel and Guy. I don't remember Clark's teammate off the top of my head, but it was definitely Rachel and Guy.
But if Rachel had teamed with Guy and Clark had teamed with whoever, that would have changed everything about the Anarchy tournament. and everything ostensibly that followed in the Schmoedown. So it's a really fascinating question to me.
Not only that, you gotta look at sick in the head. I mean, I wonder, like, Brienne's career was very short after that championship match. I can't remember if that was her
Mm-hmm.
last match or like, but if she wins the title, does she defended? How long is she still in the Schmoedown? I think we also start to view her now as like, oh, one of the great, like you're in the belt holder club now. And not only did you have great entrances and you were a great character, but now you had that final piece of winning the belt. Also, free for all winner, by the way. So not only
Mm-hmm.
did you win the free for all, great character, great. You all had almost everything but not the belt, but now you have that belt. I think you, legacy wise, that's just a huge boost. And then do we see the I think Brian Bishop becomes now the rising star of the Schmoedown. I think we see a singles career from Brian Bishop. Bet you he's in the singles tournament in some degree. And I bet you, even if Brienne still retires early or doesn't have much more Schmoedown matches after this, I bet you Brian Bishop is Christian's trying to get Brian Bishop in there as much as possible because he would be the first time didn't play a match before this, but won the championship as his first match. Like, there's just so much
Yeah.
to do with that storyline wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the winners of the tournament say it's still who's the boss versus the sick in the head for the championships at Spectacular. Like that would have been a very interesting match as well.
Let's also maybe take it a step up backwards. What if it's Who's the Boss versus Rachel and Guy
Yeah,
as the tournament final? I mean,
it would
I
have
mean,
been crazy.
my question to you is: do you think Guy turns Rachel heel, or do you think the Five Club turns Guy face?
I think it's more likely that Guy turns face and you keep Bateman heel. Even though Guy is such a great heel, I
Mhm.
just don't see how you can turn Rachel heel.
So if that's the case, then does that mean Mark Riley goes heel?
Yes.
And if that's the case, then I bet you we don't see the Horsemen. I bet you the
No.
Horsemen are going to be a different iteration. So that already changes a huge outcome.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got to remember when Riley got put into Who's the Boss with Bateman, he was
Mhm.
already in the Horsemen.
Mhm.
Bateman wasn't, and he talked them into having Bateman join the Horsemen.
Yes. So that would have been
So,
an interesting dynamic as well if Riley turns on the Horseman.
yeah, a lot of things would have been different if Sick in the Head had won that
I'll
match.
also just quickly throw one of the honorable mentions I was considering in my head that I didn't end up picking is what if Brienne chose Drew McWeeny as her team's partner for this match against the Shire Wolves, which is a very similar vein, but like
Mm-hmm.
I thought everyone thought it would be Drew McWeeny because McWeeny literally had the belts, but Sam retired. So, like, who better to compete with Brienne than Drew McWeeny? He's a proven champion. And if he beats the Shire Wolves with Brienne, I think Drew McWeeny's career also takes a completely interesting turn as well. And I think we
Yeah,
talk about him a lot differently as well. That would have been interesting as well. That whole
and
Shire Wolves match, it shows how much we love the Shire Wolves. Where our first two out the gate are, hey, what if the Shire Wolves almost never happened, or what if their career was just slightly difficult, or not difficult, but like imagine if it went another way, or
yeah, and you got to rethink about it too. Drew McWeeny and Brienne were teammates in Anarchy as Take the Cannoli,
and they did
so
great. I think it was like
they did good. Yeah,
they had a crazy match, if I remember, against Whitney and Mark Edward Hoyk.
I think so. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so Josh, let's go to your number 4, which is what if Emma Fife managed the den with Grace?
So, if I remember correctly, at the end of Spectacular, Emma Fythe was announced as the manager with Grace of the Den. Either that or there was like
I
some.
don't. It was still going to be called the Fife Club, I think, but I
Oh, it
don't
was
think it was
Fight
called
Club.
the Den. Yeah,
That's right.
I think
That's
they
right.
changed it to the Den when Kate came on board.
Yes. So I think this is more of me thinking because Emma Fife, if you think about her manager career, she's arguably one of the greatest managers ever, and she had a very short career. I'm very interested to see her what would happen in the faction phase, basically to see her manage against Shannon Barney, Winston Marshall, Coy Giandrew. I think it would be fascinating personality matchups. I think it'd be also great managerial matchups, like the new school of managers versus the old school of Fife and Dagnino. I think that kind of it would be interesting. I think also that like it would be interesting story wise just to see Emma as a heel, to see why that happened, what that would be like, and stuff like that, and to see her dynamic with Grace. I think there's just a lot of like story wise beats that can be created, and there's a reason why that was a big reveal, and Christian was ready for it and wanted to go forward with it. I think it was just an interesting story beat that was like, huh. Oh, that would have been really interesting. I really was interested to see Emma with in this new faction system and with these new competitors and with a new attitude, if you will, or like a new
Yeah, this seemed like the start of a heel turn for Emma.
absolutely. Yeah, so to see the heel turn, I think it would be interesting to see Fight Club as a heel faction because there's
Yeah.
very few factions that can pull off both face and heel. I think Corruption did it a little. The Finstock Exchange did it a tiny bit, but like Dagnino's hard to be a true face. So
Mm-hmm.
like, although maybe you could argue he did it in the Horsemen, but that's a different faction, and the Horsemen are like hard to tell their face or heels between matches, let alone. So like they're in the middle of the Horsemen in my mind, but like it'd be very interesting to see the faction history of the Fight Club be changed, that be a completely face faction and turn to a completely heel faction as well.
Absolutely. I was really interested in like seeing like Emma and Grace work together, and because they hated each other back in the days when Emma was managing the Five Club, and would have been really interesting to see. It really kind of sucks that we didn't get it. I love Kate. I love everything Kate
Yes.
brought to the den, but it really does kind of suck that we didn't get to see Emma manage in that era.
I will say my what if Kate also becomes a manager, just maybe next season or later on. Like we still get Kate. I think Kate's
Yeah.
great, absolutely. But it would have been very interesting to see. And like I wonder, like, because if I remember correctly, that was the Schmoedown draft coming up, right? What one of the
Yes,
Schmoedown drafts. And
the
I
first
wonder
one.
how differently Emma drafts than Kate. So that
Yeah,
already done. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
it would have been the first Schmoedown draft.
Oh, it was the first one, yeah. So it would be the first Schmoedown draft. I'm very curious to see the dom. I think it would the butterfly effect would be huge because Emma probably does not draft the exact same team that Kate's drafts. So who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Saul doesn't get drafted by Emma. Maybe Saul gets drafted by the Finstock Exchange or like another faction or Swag
Maybe
or
Emma drafts Odd Couple because of her relationship with Andraco in the past. Like, there's a
absolutely,
lot of interesting things that could have happened there.
absolutely.
All right, let's move on to my number 3, which is what if Andrew Guy didn't beat Dan Murrell? People forget that Andrew Guy had not played a singles match prior to this match. And he comes in and he beats Merle and he stands on the desk and he's saying F you and flipping everyone off because nobody believed that he could beat Dan Merle. Uh, would he have played a singles match again if Merle had destroyed him the way that most people thought that he would? Um, Another thought I had on this was how long would it have taken Merle to get back to the belt if he'd
Oh,
beaten
I will
Andrew
quickly
Guy?
say Christian did talk about this what if and did say that if Merle won this match against Guy, the live event would be Levine Merle instant title shot.
Yeah. So, like, would Merle have beaten Levine instantly? And then this is, I think, the one time Christian admitted he had no creative plans for this result. So he had to kind of scramble. What would have happened? What were those creative plans for Merle beyond the instant title shot if Merle had won? So, does this affect Guy's civil war with Bateman in some way? Like, there's a ton of things that could have changed if Dan Merle had won that match.
Also, if I remember correctly, I think at the end of the season, he either I think he comes second. He gets a number one contender match based on his tournament run, if I remember correctly. At the end
Mm-hmm.
of the season. Um, that completely changes if he beats Guy instantly. Who knows if he's the champion, if he's still in the tournament? Who knows if someone else wins the tournament or gets a number one contender match? I think what happened, it was at the final match. It was Clark versus Merle, and the winner played Ethan Irwin in New York. However, that completely changes if Merle wins. Who knows if he's still in that position, if he's the champion, if not. And
Does
uh,
Ethan Irwin ever become the champion?
yes,
If
absolutely. Adelia, can you remind me what was the title match that led up to? Because I know Guy plays Riley, and then Guy loses to Roka. Who does Roka play for the belt again?
I'll look it up. You keep talking.
Because I will also quickly say I remember really enjoying the Guy path where not only does he beat Merle, but he beats Riley, and so like I wonder if Riley's career changes if Guy doesn't if he doesn't have that loss to Guy as well. I think it's definitely one
Hmm.
of those matches where you're like, oh, because Riley has a weird singles career after he loses the championship, his last championship, singles championship. It's a lot of ups and downs. I wonder if he gains more positive momentum avoiding that loss to Guy.
Okay, so what it is Roka beats Guy in a number one contender match. Roka beats Bibiani,
Got it.
and then Ethan beats Clark in number one contenders match, and then Ethan beats Roka.
Got it. I think the number one contenders match was that the tournament.
Yes, I think so.
Got so that was because if I remember also correctly, Roga had a stimulation where he couldn't get to the singles title because of something a while ago that a match he lost, which Christian lifted so that he got a number one contender match against Guy. I believe it was like the ending stipulation of like an action match, maybe. I don't 100%
I don't
remember.
remember
I
a
remember that
stipulation with Roka in the singles matches. I think there was a stipulation that top 10 couldn't challenge for the titles again,
I
but I don't
remember
remember Roka's singles match
I remember there
stipulation.
was a stipulation because Kalinowski has a whole scene with Christian where he comes in as like, hey, Roka, he should play Guy, and like, oh, that silly stipulation from a while ago, let's just get rid of it or something. Or he talks to Thad, not Christian, because Thad's in charge. But
Yeah, I don't remember that, but
I distinctly remember that cutscene. So if I want in comments, feel free to correct me if I'm completely wrong or remind us what that stipulation was because I'm trying to remember and can't off the top of my head. But I want if that path isn't created, who knows if Roka is a two-time singles champion,
yeah.
and
Who
that's
knows
a
if
whole.
Bibiani's a singles champion?
Oh, that's true because Levine retires.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so not only um, well we would get Sam versus Merle, and then the winner would probably play Bibiani and Draco, or Bibiani or
The winner
Irwin.
of it, I would think Bibiani and Draco becomes a number one contenders match instead of a championship match, and then the winner of that, who is Bibiani, plays Merle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it was interesting because I don't remember if the Draco versus Irwin was confirmed a number one contender match before the whole Sam stuff, or if it was after.
I don't
Because if that
remember.
is a number one contenders match, then what might have happened is Levine Merle, then the winner of that, if Levine is still champion, because Levine might retire if he beats Merle. He might just like we might
Mm-hmm.
just delay Levine's retirement one match. But if that's not the case, then Levine or Morrill would play maybe winner of Andraco Irwin, which would end up being Andraco, and maybe then Bibbs uses his number one contender match to because that he got from the free for all that he to play the winner of that. So that might have been the title race. Um,
Maybe.
just a lot of what ifs. Definitely a lot of like different rotating doors that happens if Guy doesn't beat Merle.
Mm-hmm.
I think storyline. I'm just a quick question to you. Do you think Guy is as big of a star if he loses to Merle?
Probably not. Like I
Yeah,
love Andrew Guy. Andrew Guy is one of my favorites in the Schmoedown, but I just don't think he gets the reputation of being someone who can win a big match if he doesn't beat Merle.
and also all those memorable moments within that Merle match don't work if he's
Yeah.
losing. So, like a lot
Yeah.
of what makes him one of the greatest heels of all time, a lot of the moments we come back to is that Merle match. So that Merle match goes completely different. I wonder because I don't think those moments go away. I think they get moved to something else. So I wonder what the match is where it's like he makes a name for himself in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
All right, let's move on to your number 3, which also involves Dan Murrell, which is what if Ben Bateman beats Dan Murrell once?
I mean, this one is just like Ben Bateman had two historic leads against Dan Murrell in great championship matches, and both blew them in either sudden death or the final round. You could argue he blew them both in the final round, no matter in the round with the 2, 3, 5 pointer, the fifth round, just because of he had the lead going into both those games. I wonder what's different because if you remember back during that time, it was the Finstock exchange, and there was that weird tension between him and Roca and Dan and Riley, where it's like they were constantly trying to convince us, no, 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 we all love each other, we're all brothers, so we're going to win this
Mm-hmm.
faction war. And I wonder, and it ends up Dagnino ends up choosing Roca. It moves along with Roca at the end of that whole iteration of the Finstock exchange. I wonder if Bateman wins the championship once, it's not it's not Roca, or it's either Roca and Bateman, and he leaves Dan Murrell and Riley in the dust, and it's really Roca and Bateman. Because I think Dagnino's whole thing is about winners a lot, and I think when Bateman lost twice in the way that he did, there's no way Dagnino in his head could move forward with Bateman. However, Bateman is a champion and singles champion again, and does win the belt from Merle. Oops, sorry about that. I do wonder if Dagnino ends up leaving Bateman like he did, because him and Bateman had a history. They were super close. I think if all it takes is Bateman to win one of these two matches, and then Dagnino keeps him going on the next season, which I think would be fascinating. I'd be really excited to see maybe an exchange where it's either just Bateman and Barbarian. Hey, we might get a Bateman and Barbarian team, or Bateman and Roca, which would have been a fascinating team to cover. I think. I wonder. I wonder if we have more interesting GOAT debates where it's like if Dan loses one or both of these matches, where it's like, oh, Kalinowski's obviously the GOAT until Sam comes along. So I think that would have been interesting and changed the whole discussion. I don't know. I think there's a lot. This is basically like me going back to the Finstock exchange and the what's it called? The Finstock exchange and the sorry. I'm getting distracted because do you mind if I just mute? We can't
No,
edit this out.
no, we can't. It's fine. Um, I will just say you can mute yourself if you want while I do this. I will just say that if Bateman beats Dan Murrell, I think it solidifies his legacy as a singles player much more than um, if he doesn't. And I mean, those are two kind of heartbreaking losses for Bateman up against Murrell, and I just think that we look at Ben Bateman a lot differently if he had beaten him once. We probably never get Danger Zone as part of the dungeon. We probably never get Rushmore as part of the Finstock exchange with Roca and JTE. That changes the entire complexity of the teams division in the next season. Um, there's a lot of really interesting questions about how we'd look at the Schmoedown if Ben Bateman had beaten Murrell once.
Absolutely, absolutely. Apologies about that. My sister started calling me and calling me and calling me. We're in the same house, by the way, but so like I just had to quickly deal with that.
It's okay. Let's move on to my number 2, and I have another Star Wars one, and this is one of the ones that I've always wondered about, which is what if Sam Witwer and Alex Damon had gotten to play that championship match? Would we have had the start of a dominant champion Sam Witwer in the Fife Club? Or would Alex have won and gone on the same dominant streak that he had? Or would it have been the start of a great rivalry where they were trading the belt back and forth, and we'd have a much more competitive Star Wars division if Sam Witwer was in it, maybe, than we ended up getting with him having to leave the Schmoedown. Um, It's just a question that I've always wondered about. What would that match look like? Who would come out on top?
Absolutely. I think it would be very interesting because I wonder if it's not just if Wit were and had that one match. It's if what if Wit were to stay in the Star Wars division just for a couple years. Like, what if
Mm-hmm.
it like would Damon still be as dominant, or would it be like a great rivalry where it's like Damon wins one and defends one, but then Whitwer wins and defends one, and then Damon comes back. It's just like a back and forth where it could have been like Whitwer theoretically could have at the time it was the only person theoretically who really challenged Damon for that most dominant position, and he did beat Damon. Damon's first match is a loss to Sam Witwer in that I can't remember if it was a 4-way, a 5-way, a 3-way, but in that
I
like
think it was a 5-way.
I wanted to say 5-way, I just wasn't 100% sure. My Star Wars memory isn't as good as the other ones, but yeah, I think absolutely this is a great one. It would have been interesting because if we had a like truly, truly great rivalry, and Damon wasn't so easily dominating the division. I do wonder if the Star Wars division gets more matches, if it gets more highlight, if it's like they try really hard to find that third person because it's like we have Whitworth, we have Damon. I do wonder if Scrimshaw can be that third person and within
Mm-hmm.
that rivalry. Maybe his career takes a trajectory up because he might get a match against Whitworth, and I think Scrimshaw can beat Whitworth. So I think it would be really interesting how the Star Wars division would play out and how it. I think there was a chance it could have gotten Star Wars a lot more matches for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to your number 2, which is what if Kalinowski doesn't sing the Flash theme song? I don't remember this, so please enlighten me.
So this was a match against Chef Snyder, and he had a 3-pointer. And if I remember correctly, the question was asking about the actor, but Kalinowski answers like Flash or something like that to like almost singing the theme song, and the announcers are confused, so they're like, "Can you clarify the answer?" And Kalinowski answers Flash Gordon, I believe, and not the actor's name. They have to mark him incorrect, and he ends up losing that match. Now, Christian has gone on record and said he has never done this for any other match, but he was curious, so he asked after the match. He asked Jeff Snyder his 3 and 5 pointers to see if he would have gotten it if Jeff Snyder had it, because it wasn't like, oh, if Kalinowski answers this he wins. It was a 3-pointer. So
Mm-hmm.
Christian does this and Jeff gets both of them wrong. So if Kalinowski, because he knew the answer, but he got too excited. He did the Flash Gordon theme song instead of answering the question. The announcers got confused. And that was a number one contenders match. And the winner would play Paul Oyama in New York. And I do kind of think Kalinowski beats Paul Oyama in New York because Paul Oyama was not at his A game in that New York live event. I think Kalinowski's more seasoned and he comes up. He has a much better live event track record. I think we see Kalinowski as a singles champion if he beats Jeff Snyder by. He knows the answer. He knows the answer, but it's one of those moments where it's just like, oh my god, you gotta feel bad for him because it's like he had it in his brain, and he just got too excited, and he tried to do an answer where he sings, and it got the announcers confused. I think it. I think whole Schmoedown history's changed because I think Kalinowski, for a while at least, and even at the end, if Sam Levine still does his dominant run, I think a lot of people say Kalinowski's the GOAT. You have the singles, teams, and IG championship. It'd be a very
Yeah.
tough record to be like Kalinowski isn't the GOAT, especially winning it against Paul Oyama at a live event in New York. Who knows if he beats Paul Oyama? Maybe Paul Oyama still defends, but I think, and not only that, Kalinowski's not in the singles tournament anymore, which he was because he lost to Jeff Snyder. And I remember his first round matchup was against Janine. Maybe Janine has a different opponent, wins, goes on her run. I think Kalinowski went on a decent run in that tournament. So like at least he at least won against Janine. I can't remember if he went further, but I think it would have been really interesting because I think that whole tournament changes a bit with Janine possibly having a different opponent. Maybe she wins, so that affects the singles tournament. But I also just want I can't imagine or I would love to imagine a Kalinowski single championship and how the storyline affects that. To see Kalinowski's have the single belt and kind of lord it over everyone, where he's like, I'm kind of the team champion, I'm the IG champion, that's my go. But I'm bored, so I got the singles champion right here. And even if he
Yeah.
loses it immediately afterwards, like Kalinowski being a singles champion is is it's the number 2 greatest what if for me for a reason, because I'm like, I think the whole history of the Schmoedown changes. I think, and I think Kalinowski legacy, he's unquestionably the GOAT. Even if Sam Levine goes on the same run, then it's an argument, but I still think I'd probably lean towards Kalinowski in that argument.
I mean, so many things with the championship could have changed if Kalinowski had won that match against Jeff Snyder, then gone to New York and beaten Paul Oyama. I believe Paul Oyama's next defense after that was against Ben Bateman at
It was.
Spectacular, where Bateman won. Does that happen? Does Bateman beat Kalinowski in a singles match? That would have been fascinating to see.
Could you imagine Bateman losing to Kalinowski in a singles championship match?
Oh boy, that would have been fun to watch. Actually,
Ben Bateman would have to
really fun to
retire.
watch.
If Ben Bateman lost to Kalinowski in a singles championship match, I think Ben Bateman would.
Yeah. Lots of interesting questions with that one, Josh. I totally don't remember him doing that. I'm gonna have to go back and watch that now. But let's take a moment before we reveal our number ones to hear from Justin about what's going on with the channel.
Hey guys, it's Justin, aka Hambone, just here to let you know a couple of things that we have going on with the channel. One, we have a Patreon. If you can and want to support us, you can do that. Little as $1. You can join the Discord. We also have a merch store where you can get some cool shirts, mugs, and stuff with all of our different shows and labels on there. Okay. And thank you for all of our supporters that have already been there with us.
And that's patreon.com/LGR_network. If you're interested in supporting the channel, there's a link in the description of this video, or the audio if you're listening on the audio feed. Let's start with my number one. And my number one is one that would change the entire history of the Schmoedown tag team division. And that is, what if Clark Wolf had made a different choice at the decision and teamed up with JTE? Wolves of Steel never forms, but more importantly, the Patriots never form. And then even further down the line, would the Shire Wolves maybe have never happened? Who would become the most dominant team in Schmoedown history? Because without the building pieces of the Patriots and Wolves of Steel and the Shire Wolves, do we get a situation where Shazam becomes by far the most dominant team in Schmoedown history? Or is somebody else, Clark and JTE, maybe go on that run that the Patriots had? It's really, really fascinating question to me.
Absolutely. I mean, if the Patriots never existed, I wonder who Snyder's teammate would end up being. I wonder, like, would Snyder be as dominant as or JTE or Clark? If Clark is with JTE and they win the belt, Clark she already won Rookie of the Year, but I mean, who knows what the track
She'd be
is?
the first female champion in the Schmoedown.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but like, who knows if the Shire Wolves are a thing? Who know how the future of the Lions Den, are the Lions Den as dominant? Who would be a part of the Lions Den? I remember at the beginning, Merle was originally a Lions Den member. Maybe that stays the course if JT and the Patriots never were the Lions Den. Who knows? This changes. This is a great one that I didn't think of. This absolutely changes everything, because it's like the further back you go, the butterfly effect is more prominent. And this is so early on in the Schmoedown. You change this one thing, and there are a million things that change from it. Maybe Ken and Rachel win a championship with their team, because the Patriots the Patriot. There were a lot of teams that were not to the level of the Patriots at that moment, and weren't able to become title teams because they were just like, the Patriots were just so ahead of their time. I wonder if a team like Modoc, which played against the Patriots and almost beat the Patriots, I wonder if they obviously win a championship or come close to winning a championship. I wonder if there's a team that came. I wonder what the team is that was always close to a championship that never won it, that would come in and be like, oh, this is now one of the greatest teams of all time. That were just, or not one of the greatest teams of all time, but a very memorable and great team that ends up being a champion. That we think about those two competitors differently because they're champions.
Mm-hmm. And like, what about Above the Line? Does Above the Line form? Because one of the reasons for Above the Line forming was to take down the Patriots.
Absolutely.
So many things could be entirely different. Anarchy would look different. Everything would look different if Clark Wolf had teamed up with JT.
I wonder if Clark Wolf's still a face if she teams up with JT. Do you think JT is a face or Clark Wolf's a heel?
It would have been really interesting to see heel Clark Wolf. I think she's obviously she's an actress. She obviously has the acting chops. She could have pulled it off, but it's hard to picture Clark Wolf in the Schmoedown as a heel, but it would have been really interesting to see her teaming up with JTE. And what happens with Mark Riley? Who does Mark Riley team up with if he's not teaming up with Clark Wolf?
Maybe Dan and Riley, even though they have a loss on their record, they bring the team back together and go into the teams division.
Maybe Riley is Snyder's partner. Does Snyder and Riley become the most dominant team in Schmoedown history?
That would have been one, and then that means I think Snyder was always going to be heel. So I wonder if my only question about that is would they have Riley turn heel so early on? Is my guess, but who knows? Maybe that is the case. Maybe it's like who's the boss before who's the boss, but instead of Bateman and Snyder.
Yeah. And it's one that just as soon as you said we were going to do this and I sat down to come up with these 5, I was like, okay, that's my number 1. It's the first one I came up with and I was like, that's number 1. And I just know right now it's number 1. So let's talk about your number 1, which is also a very interesting one, which is what if Matt Atchity doesn't challenge his opponent's incorrect question?
So if everyone remembers, Matt Atchity is like, I can't do this, Drew. I got to challenge the question. That's not a fair question. And the family ends up beating Paddington 2. Now, the comments in hindsight always are like, well, no, the question was completely fair. But like, if the opponent is challenging it, like, I don't blame the judges for making that ruling. I think of Atch because the family, I think, disbands after that for sure. And what's so interesting to me is not only does that change the tournament because now Shazam is playing either Paddington 2 or Who's the Boss. And I'm not saying they had a better chance than the family to beat Shazam, but the reason why I put this in my number 1, first off, it's just when I think of a what if of like what would the Schmoedown be like, there's no more obvious one because it was on the 5-pointer. It was the last question. The Paddington 2 literally won the match. And they're like, actually, we don't want to win the match. Or not, that's not fair wording, but it's more, actually, we don't think we won the match. So let's do this again with a new 5-pointer and they end up losing. I wonder who wins in the Paddington 2 versus Who's the Boss. But the reason why it's so influential in my mind is because if you remember, after this tournament, it was the first Schmoedown draft, and the top 5 teams were protected. So one of those top 5 teams that were protected was the family. So I'm just going to go down both scenarios. Let's say, which I think would have happened, Who's the Boss wins and plays Shazam in the finals, which, by the way, would have been a great finals as well. Then I think the top 5 team, instead of the family that gets protected, is the Looney Bin. And I think the Looney Bin stays apart. And this is why it's my number 1, is not only does the family disband and who knows who plays Shazam in the finals, but this keeps the Looney Bin together, this matchup. And so I wonder what manager would have drafted the Looney Bin. I wonder what the Looney Bin future would have been next season in teams. Looney Bin is the go-to team that broke up too early because of the draft. And like, that would have been fascinating. By the way, who had the number 1 pick in that draft? Sam Levine. He picks Drew McWeeny, and he's forced to take Andrew Guy as his number 2. Family aren't protected anymore, so it's now Drew McWeeny, and who knows who the number 2 is? Maybe it's not even Drew McWeeny, maybe because McWeeny said he only came back to give it one more shot with Guy, if I remember correctly, or something similar, because he retires after the first match with Guy. And so I wonder what happens. Who's the number 1 pick? If McWeeney's not in the draft, what happens if Sam Levine drafts Shazam as his number 1 pick?
Ooh, that would be very different.
Yeah, so then who knows who Coy Andrews drafts? That changes the whole outcome of the
It
draft.
changes the whole draft.
Where does Andrew Guy go? Who's Andrew Guy's team partner? Just so much that can go on and like because this match is maybe the most important match that had impacts on the draft because of that top 5 team protection. And let's say the Paddington 2, let's say they were the protected team. Let's say they beat Who's the Boss and go into the finals against Shazam. Paddington 2 might be a championship worthy team, or at least we see a lot more Paddington 2 matches. Who knows how high they go up in the draft? There's just like in my head, it's such the quintessential what if just because of actually really did not have to do that. He had the game won. It was like so many people, I think, even if they thought that the question was fair, would not challenge their opponent's question. Actually, he's one of the few people who would do that and would give away the win like that. And I think that shows his integrity, but that also shows like it shows like, oh, this was a clear turning point. This is a clear like what if scenario, because if this never happens, the whole history of the Schmoedown is completely different. And there's just so much to think about and talk about, and I'm really curious. And also, this might be unfair of me. This is why I kind of blame Atchity for the Looney Bin breaking up. I'm like, God damn it, Atchity! Like you gotta think past yourself and the integrity game. You have to think about the Looney Bin. You got to think about the Looney, but it's fine. But because of the format of the draft and the top 5 protected team, and maybe McWeeny retiring after that match, based on him saying one of the only reasons, I think Christian said that one of the only reasons he came back to give it another go with Guy, but he was busy and wasn't sure. I don't know if McWeeny might just tell Sam, "Don't draft me number 1. I might retire at the beginning of the season." So I just think there's so much that kind of just changes if the family is in the protected team and if the Paddington 2 win that match.
I totally agree. I never would have thought about this one for a second, but like the Looney Bin, one of my favorite teams of all time, them breaking up broke my heart. I had conversations with Video Drew about this. I was like, I miss Tom. I miss you and Tom together. And wow, I didn't think about the fact for a second that it really comes down to this moment. Matt Adjety challenging that question. Wow. I'm a little stunned right now.
It's one of those like, because I've thought about this a lot about like what happens if Ashley doesn't challenge the question, especially in the moment when it happened. And when Christian said it's top 5 teams, I'm like, well, Family's not a top 5 team if they lose to the Paddington 2 in that way in the tournament. And the team's history, I mean, like it would have been interesting to see Guy, because also who knows if we even get the Schmoedown of storyline if Guy's
So
not a
much
part
would
of
have
the.
changed.
I mean, the whole I think outcome of the draft changes because I think Shazam goes number 1 because they were the clear number 1 in most people's mocks. But the only reason is like, well, Sam might just draft McWeeny because he's McWeeny and they're a good friend, you know. But I think the consensus was, well, you have to draft Shazam. There, you get Bibbs and the kid. There was no better there. So yeah, there's just I've thought about this a lot. So I'm like, man, that's been my number 1 for a while because I'm like, Looney Bin, possible change in the draft, and then the thing we've talked about the least is the tournament outcome. What if the Paddington 2 or Who's the Boss beat Shazam? What if one of them go on to even beat the Founding Fathers in the final spectacular? I mean, that changes everything because then let's say the Founding Fathers lose to Who's the Boss, or let's say they lose to Who's the Boss. Then Merle and Roca head into the draft because they're not protected anymore. Let's say the Paddington 2 beat are the champions.
That would have been a stretch, but yeah.
Let's just play out that Fantasyland event where they somehow beat Who's the Boss and then Family and the Founding Fathers. That means Ben Bateman's the only protected person I think Riley would be protected in it, as I said. So like I guess in theory, then still Dagnino but there's a chance that because of actually challenging his own question, Roca and Dan are not protected by Dagnino, and maybe Sam goes number one. I'm going to draft Dan Murrell and John Roca. I'm going to be Sam managing John Roca would have been such an interesting combination.
Yeah.
But who maybe he doesn't draft Roca for that alone, and maybe Roca falls to Coy Jandrew. Maybe the founding fathers are managed by the quirky Mercs. And
That would have been something.
so,
Roca and Coy.
so there's a lot to think about, and like there's just like I don't know how it would have turned out. I don't know if the Paddington 2 go on to at least beat the Who's the Boss. I don't know if Who's the Boss goes on to win or if they go on a run. But like all I know is for the sole fact that the family are not a top 5 protected team, I think that changes everything.
It does. It really does. All right, Josh. Those were our top 5 Schmoedown What Ifs. I think we came up with some good ones.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know in the comments what your top 5 Schmoedown What Ifs are, or if you can only think of 1 or 2, that's fine too. We'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And Josh, where can the people find you?
They can find me here on LGR. I'm here on the Nostalgia Crackdown once a month. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm also appearing on the Loki reviews. I have not seen the latest episode yet. I'm excited for it. And I am in the Fantasy Football League, although my record's not looking too good. So, I doubt I'm going to be appearing on unless Ferris wants to bring me on just to laugh at me, which is very possible. But if that's the case, you can find me on the Fantasy Football Roundup. So those are the 3 main things. But just go support LGR, the Patreon. It's a great deal. Love this community and appreciative to be on.
All right. You can find me on Starting 11 over on the Highlights channel. There's a link to that in the description. Starting 11's every 3 p.m. Pacific on Tuesdays. Me and Snark talking about the English Premier League. You can also find me here on this channel with Ferris every Friday, 8 p.m. Pacific on the Open Table, talking about whatever we feel like. We haven't had one show in a couple of weeks because I was sick, then Ferris was sick, and then Ferris had some work obligations. But we're hopefully back this week. And let's see you guys back here in a month for another episode of Nostalgia Crackdown. Until next time, we're out.
It's for real.